if I'm going to say anything tonight that, again, you want to take notes on, let's take a look at Genesis chapter 15. And I am going to want to read this one, or have somebody read it. Somebody volunteer to read and just start reading. I want the whole read the whole chapter 15.
After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid. I am your shield. Reward shall be very great. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer and Damascus. And Abram said, you have given me no offspring, and so a slave is born in my house is to be my heir. But the word of the Lord came to him, the man shall not be your heir. No one but your very own issue shall be your heir. He brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and count the stars. If you're able to count them, then he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And he believed, then he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And he believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned him to him as righteousness. Then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you from Ur, the Chaldeans, to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? He said to him, bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, and a turtle dove and a young pigeon. He brought him all of these and cut them in two, laying each half over against the other. But he did not cut the birds in two. And when the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell over Abram, and a deep and terrifying darkness descended upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, know this for certain, that your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs, and they shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with the great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. And they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for iniquity of the Amorites and and they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, a smoking fire pot, flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the land of the Kezanites, the land of Kadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites,
and the
Jebusites.
And the Heebie-Jeebeites.
And all the sites have got it.
That's right. You got all the ites. Stictites and stalagmites and watermelon. Can you say Jebusites, the Girgashites, the Rephaim? Do you ever read a passage of scripture and go, huh, what's that about? Well,
sometimes.
I hope sometimes you do. Or maybe you read a passage of scripture and it just strikes you, there's something going on there, but I didn't get it all.
Yeah.
Well, since I started this class, I'm doing it with everything I read.
Good. Chapter 15 has a whole backstory that it's so easy to read past this and just go, oh, yeah, move on. But chapter 15 um, can be hugely important if you understand what's going behind it. So let's walk through it, and along the way, you want to take notes about covenant. You really want to. That's just really what we're going to key in on here is the word covenant. Genesis 15. After these things, we're looking at Abraham in a vision. So he's having a vision, but that vision turns into something physical in the physical world because Abram has a conversation with God, and he complains about continuing to be childless. And Eleazar of Damascus is the heir of his house, his chief slave, as it were, is going to be who inherits. And God tells him no, that, his very own issue, some child of his will be his heir. And then Abram goes outside with God, and you count the stars, so shall your descendants be. And this statement is key. It's so amazingly key. And he believed the Lord. And Abram believed the Lord.
Yeah.
And the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. And sometimes we get asked questions about, faith and works and Old Testament, New Testament, Old Covenant, New Covenant, which I almost always go back to this passage, Genesis 15:6, and say, and by the way, Paul did this too. Paul the Apostle did this, probably with the Septuagint, not the King James Version of the Bible, but it would have worked if it had been the King James Version of the Bible too. Yeah. Nobody would have understood the English, but it says, and he believed the Lord, and Abram, the antecedent here, and Abram believed the Lord. He believed, he trusted, and that word really can be translated. I think I've said that before, but when you find believe in the Bible, the word that should really come to mind is trust in modern English. An absolute trust. He believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. So the Lord counted that belief, that trust, as making Abram righteous. And so, what's the requirement of God to be righteous before God?
Trust.
Trust him.
Faith, belief. That's right. It's just trust. It's faith. It's belief. And it's all the same. We use all three of those words to explain one thing. And that's what Abraham did when God told him this. And he believed the Lord. And he was reckoned righteous. God accounted him as righteous because he believed what God said. And don't take that, the thing is you got to kind of hold that because, in verse 8, Abram's going to say, but, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? And that's not, I don't trust you. It's just, give me a sign here, please, help me. And that's when we start getting weird. And I'm just going to encourage you, when the scriptures start getting weird, you need to start digging. Right? He said to him, bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. By the way, that's a pretty good amount of livestock.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that about? What in the world does it mean? God says, bring me a heifer 3 years old, and a female goat 3 years old, and a ram 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a pigeon. Well, I'm just going to tell you that Abram was not confused about what God was saying. We are, but you won't be after tonight. But Abram was absolutely not confused This didn't seem strange or weird or anything like that to Abram, because he knew what God was going to do. He knew what this meant. And then we get another clue. He brought all these and he cut them. God didn't say, we don't read, and God said, cut them in half, offer them to me and say, but Abram knows what's going on. God says, bring these animals, and Abram knows I'm supposed to butcher them, and I'm supposed to divide them in half, and I'm supposed to lay them out on the ground, one over against the other. So, sorry, we're not in a place where I can just, but you got my hands together here. If you look at your screens, my hands together here are the heifer.
Mm-hmm.
In case you've never butchered an animal's got a backbone. And after you skin them, you can split them down that backbone and lay one half over against the other. Literally, you're taking half of the heifer, which is a cow, half of that cow, and laying it over here, and half of it and laying over here. And then you move to the female goat, and you butcher it, you skin it, and you lay half of it over here, and you lay half of it over here. You take the ram, and you butcher it, you kill it, you skin it, you take half of it and lay it over here and over here. Now, if I was a great artist or could draw or something, what you would see is we're creating a path between the animals. Half a heifer, half a heifer. Half a female goat, half a female goat. Half a ram, a turtle dove, and a pigeon. We got a path that goes between them. They've all been slaughtered. They've all been prepared, as it were, to be cooked or feasted upon. And now there exists on the ground this path. And you need to know the name of the name of this is the blood path.
Right.
And it's the blood path because it's the blood of the animals that have been slaughtered that's made the path. The halves of the animals are out. So what God has done is God has reached right into Abram's culture. And he said, he's answered Abram's question, how shall I know that I shall possess the land? By saying, set up, and this is not written in the text, but it's absolutely assumed by what goes on. Because God says, get these animals, and Abram knows what God is telling Abram to do is to set up a covenant sealing ceremony. A covenant sealing ceremony. We got to pause right there and we got to jump sideways and talk about covenants. Okay? What is a covenant? Well, it is not a contract. A lot of time in modern talk, people get the two confused, and you just need to know a covenant is not a contract. So I'm going to tell you a story to explain covenants, especially ancient covenants. You, Mr. Steve, are going to be my guinea pig. And Steve, you just got promoted, and you are the king of a little city-state that lies in a lovely little green valley down along the Jordan River. You've got fields to the north and to the south, and all of your minions in your city recognize you as their king. And you're pretty smart, and you're pretty good at putting a little army together. You know how to throw down when you have to. And so you protect all the people in your city, and they acknowledge your leadership. And one day, right up on the ridge, there's the big daddy king from over the mountain and his giant army. And his army is bigger than the whole of the population, men, women, and children of your little city. And that's just his army, let alone the people that he controls. And you see him up there on the mountaintop, and you're thinking, well, he could just come down here wipe us out and take whatever he wants. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And what you're hoping is that he's a reasonable guy and you hadn't made him mad and he doesn't want to just kill you. And so what you may do is you may go out to him. You may, go out unarmed or kind of with a white flag up or something. You may go out and parlay, borrow a word from the Pirates movie, right? You want to have a little talk with him. And in that talk, you might say, this is an impressive army you got here. Is there any way we could avoid fighting? And that king, because he's a smart king and he's a shrewd businessman too, and he knows that you're worth more alive than you are dead. He says, yes, King Steve. We are going to enter into a covenant. Why don't you go back to your city and prepare the covenant sealing ceremony? And I will come with my entourage at evening time and we will seal the covenant. Well, you'll get the animals together and you'll get your butchers together and maybe you'll do this blood path thing, or maybe you'll wait till the big king comes down the hill with his entourage. And there you are in the town square, right in front of your big house /house, and there are the animals standing there. And it's all prepared. And so you give the word, you give the command, and your priests or your folks, they start slaughtering those animals. And as they prepare them, they spill their blood. They kill them, and they lay a half, and they lay a half. And they do exactly what Abraham's done here. They slaughter, they skin, they lay a half, they lay a half. They're preparing the blood path. And you're at your end, and then the big king's over at his end, and they're watching all of this go down. This is big ceremony. And then the big king comes around, and he says to you, King Steve, I'm so glad you've chosen to be my covenant partner. My covenant with you is going to be, I am going to protect you from any other army coming over this hill and messing with you in your little valley. You can call and ask me for help if another army threatens your people. We're covenant partners. And if I need your men to go to war with my men, I will let you know. I need to add your army to my army so we can protect ourselves because we're going to be covenant partners. And I'm probably going to want you to give me about 10% of your crops every year. Don't cheat me now. If you cheat me, what we just did to these animals, we're going to do to you. But if I don't live up to my end of this covenant, we're saying what we just did to these animals, you do to me. Because blood's on the line with the covenant. And you're thinking, that's a lot better deal than having the big king and his army kill every man, woman, and child in my little city, my little kingdom here, and just taking off what he wants. So you say, yes, O great king, I will gladly enter into this covenant with you and be a faithful covenant partner. And then pretty much you and the big king, you lock arms and you take a little stroll and you walk right between those animals from one end all the way to the other. And when you finish, the feasting starts. They start picking those animals up and cleaning them and cooking them. And you're going to have a big feast and celebrate that you're now covenant partners. And by walking through the halves of those animals, you've ratified the covenant. You've sealed it with blood. And you've said for the whole world to see, your side and their side, if we don't keep our side of the covenant, which is basically come if he calls us to war and give him 10% of our crops a year, that your blood is the king, or whoever succeeds you as king, it's on the line because y'all are in covenant. But if he doesn't protect you, then his blood's on the line. And honor, in an honor-bound culture, which these cultures were honor-bound cultures, it really meant something. They weren't going to cheap out on the covenant. if they made a covenant with you, and they were pretty strategic when they did that, they intended to keep that covenant. It was a solemn vow, and they were honor bound to do it, and they would forfeit their life. Blood would be required to breach the covenant if it was failed. If one party failed. Now, let's come back to our story with Abram. So God tells Abram, prepare the blood path, prepare the Sumerian. This goes all the way back into Sumerian law, Sumerian Akkadian traditions. Prepare the blood path, prepare the covenant sealing ceremony, because I'm going to enter into covenant with you. That's what he's telling him. He makes it explicit. We hear that word later, but Abram knows what's going on because this is warp and woof of his culture, the way things are done in the day of Abram. Now, what's interesting to me is I listened to Dennis Kinlaw teach on this passage one time. Dennis is now gone. He was the president of Asbury Seminary. He was a professor there for a long time, undergrad and then graduate, and then the president of the college, and then undergraduate professor again, sort of in his retirement. Amazing scholar and a good Methodist preacher in the days when you could be a good Methodist preacher, and there might still be some of those around. But he taught about this. As the first time I heard this explained this way. So I give credit where credit is due to Dennis Kinlaw and his explanation of the blood path and the sealing of the covenant. But what happens is the parties that pass through the halves of the animals are pledging their blood to keep the covenant. What's very interesting here is that we have what Dennis said was a very rare but not unheard of variation of the covenant sealing ceremony, where only one of the parties walks the blood path. And when that happened, and only one of the parties walks the blood path, is guaranteeing performance of the covenant terms for both sides.
I hadn't thought about it in that only one walk.
Right.
God walked it. Yeah.
So deep darkness falls upon Abram.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And God says to him, know this for certain, your offspring shall be aliens in a land that's not theirs. They shall be slaves, and they shall be oppressed 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation they serve, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these two pieces. The smoke and the fire, both symbols of the presence of God, passed between the halves. And only the symbols of God. So only God walks the blood path. And in doing so, he's pledging his blood as what will be given to heal a breach. I know that I really like to stay within the confines of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible when we're studying the Hebrew Bible, but how can God, an incorporeal being, pledge blood?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because he doesn't have any blood yet, but we know that someday he will. Right?
Yeah, I've had people had conversations on this about that, saying, how could God like you said, pledge blood or pledge himself, on it when everything is God at the same time. But that's the seriousness of the covenant.
That's right. And he pledges blood.
Yeah.
We know that the day is coming when the blood of Jesus Christ will be given to satisfy the breach of the covenant.
Mm-hmm.
Because Abram's side of the covenant is not. It's not that Abram's not going to keep it, but his side of the covenant's not going to be kept. But the day is going to come when God, in the person of Jesus Christ, is going to hang on the cross, and his blood is going to be given to heal the breach between the covenant partners. And that breach was created when the human side, when the Abram side of the covenant is broken. And it'll be broken many times.
Mm-hmm.
But God,
when Abram was in this situation, if you go back up to 6, and he believed the Lord and reckoned in him as righteousness.
Right.
He's going back up, and to me, that's what he's believing, that the Lord is sealing this in blood at that time.
That's right.
Because he believed what the Lord said.
That's right. Took the Lord at his word.
If the Lord says he's going to seal it in blood and he's going to walk the blood path,
he's going to have blood. He's going to have blood to give.
Yeah.
So for those people who want to find Jesus in the Old Testament, I think that it's hard not to find it right here. It's hard not to find that God is pledging blood that he won't have until Jesus is incarnate. Right? He won't have blood until Jesus is born. And then his blood will be shed to heal the covenant.
That's the new covenant.
That's the new covenant. In his blood. Yeah. Not the blood of Adam.
Yeah, because a lot of times you can almost make an assumption that the new covenant is, the Mosaic covenant going somewhere around there. But no, this actually does go back to Abram.
Goes all the way back to Abram.
Yeah.
That's right. I just don't know, but I have trouble not getting a little bit excited when I read that. When I read about God making a covenant with Abram, and really Abram with humanity, because through him all the nations of the world will be blessed. All the peoples of the world will be blessed. And they'll be blessed because God will heal the breach through the shedding of his blood in the person of Jesus Christ on the cross of Calvary. So there's a lot going on here, and it's really important, this concept of covenant. I will make a covenant with you. God makes a covenant, and that's why the covenant is always, if you think about covenants are made, but in large part the terms are always dictated by the more powerful person in the covenant, the party in the covenant. That's why they're very different than contracts. In modern contract law, both parties are considered, quote unquote, equal bargaining, are considered to have equal bargaining statute at the bar, meaning under law, they both have the ability to propose contract terms. Very often, contract terms are referred to as covenants, but that's actually a little different use of the word in the modern legal sense. They're really contract terms. Okay?
Grace.
And one of the things about you know the difference between a contract and an agreement. Any of you that have ever pretty much borrowed money to buy a house, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get a loan agreement. Do you remember having the ability to alter any of the terms of that loan agreement? Did the bank ask you to propose how you would like that to be structured? No, they didn't. That's why it's a loan agreement and not a contract. Because if it was a contract, it'd have to be negotiated. Contracts are negotiated instruments, and agreements are imposed instruments. And so in that sense, our modern concept of a legal agreement is a lot more like the ancient concept of a covenant, where the one with the stronger standing has the ability to sort of impose terms upon the weaker one. But once they enter into covenant, that's one of the reasons why, a king could choose to fight instead of going to covenant, because he might not want to be obligated to you. He might not want to be honor bound to you. And so a covenant was a very serious and really honorable, but also a somewhat rare thing. So, and this concept of covenant is woven into the Old Testament. Of course, God made a covenant with Noah. God made a covenant with Abram. God is going to make a covenant. I'm going to thumb through some stuff here, but God is going to make a covenant with Isaac and Jacob. We're going to have the covenant at Sinai with Moses and the people of Israel. Joshua is going to renew the covenant. And then there's going to be the new covenant, right? Jesus says at the Last Supper, right? This is the new covenant in my blood. And it's interesting that the new covenant in his blood is the healing of the old covenant in which his blood was pledged. You get how these things tie together.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to give you a few moments for reaction. Anybody want to say anything?
I'm typing.
I mean, just the whole love God has for us, looking back then, I don't know, I hadn't brought it in those terms.
Well, when you really think about, I think when you add this understanding of Genesis 15 to the mix, then you see how there is a continuity between the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's a continuity in the way in which God has dealt with humanity from both Old and New Testaments. God has created the world. God is the God of creation. He's made the world. He's making a people as he covenants with Abram to make a people. And he's going to make multiple peoples because, Abram on his side of the covenant is going to get impatient, and his Sarai is going to give her maidservant to Abram, right?
Yeah.
Well, if I look at this, we're talking about a situation that Abram was born in 2166 BC or somewhere around there.
Okay. Yep.
And just the scope of what God knows. He made a covenant that he already knew he was going to cover.
Right.
2,000 years, well over 2,000 years before he covered it.
All right.
I mean, that's mind-boggling in itself. That when we talk about what we know and what God knows, he sees all from beginning to end.
Well, again,
we see now.
That's right.
That's just crazy.
And so, as we think about the Torah the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which we're not going to walk through with the same detail we walked through Genesis. This is about the end of our very detailed sort of plunging into Genesis, and the rest is going to be concepts and overview and a dip here and a dip there. But we've encountered God as the God of creation. God creates, and that creation is good, and God is in some way revealed in his creation. He's a God of order. He brings order to chaos. There is, I'll say, beauty and grace. God makes a good creation. He is good. He has purposes for both creation and for humanity. And those are just all woven in to the story of creation. His word is powerful. It creates, it actually, the word that God utters, the power of his spoken word brings things into existence from nothing and creates order out of the chaos. There is the etiology of the 7 days and the 7th day on which God rests, and so that the kind of orderliness to the created order, but also the rhythm of life, where there's all this activity, and then God does, the way the story goes, God rests. He demonstrates to us how the pattern of our life needs to be. We work, but we need rest. And certainly, the ancient Hebrews seem to have understood somehow divine revelation, hint, hint, that human beings needed rest, right? And now we have this wonderful science, modern psychology, right? We have this wonderful modern scientifically evidence-based knowledge that says human beings need self-care. We need rest. And that the whole concept of 1 day a week as a kind of a day of rest, a day that we don't toil and labor, a de-stress and a decompress day. You can go pay money and sit in 2 days worth of seminar. You can go pay $4,500 and sit through 2 days of seminar in some luxury hotel to be told you need to take a day of rest. If you want to be at your peak performance, you need to take a day and rest. You need to figure out how to take care of yourself and how to de-stress and decompress and how to de-roll. And they'll give you all of these things that you need to be doing in order to basically do what God did on the 7th day of creation. That pattern needs to repeat itself. And somehow the ancient Hebrew people knew that. Again, hint, hint, maybe it was divine revelation. And then humans, as part of the created order, but within the way that biblical narrative runs, a special high order of creation that bears the image of God. We have a purpose. God made us with a purpose. We were put on the earth. Why did God put the man in the garden? To till and keep it. To till it and keep it. I am always reminded when I say that of being in the cathedral at Canterbury in England and having a tour guide point out the oldest Christian stained glass art in the British Isles, which is to be found in the front window of the Canterbury Cathedral. And they think it dates to the early 900s. And it is God and Adam is holding a shovel. The idea being they put him in the garden to till and keep the earth. We aren't the first ones to think these thoughts, A lot of Christians before us, and in this sense, a lot of Jewish scholars, us Christians, understood God made human beings with a purpose. He gave us work to do. And his image. We are meant to be his representatives in the world. I think I locked up again, and I'm going to Okay?
Sure.
Meant to represent him in the world. And then sin, right? Sin comes into the world through human choice. Maybe before I say that, I should have said human beings not only are created in the image of God, but in that beautiful, beautiful second story of creation in Genesis chapter 2, we have this very, very beautiful scene that's painted for us in that story where God, like a potter, comes to the earth and the clay, and he forms or sculpts out of the dust of the earth the human form. And I don't know, I've always said, to me, when you think about how intimate that moment is, I encourage you to just see God is made this human like clay figure molded in the dust of the earth, and he takes one hand and he cups the back of that dust man's head, and he kind of raises it up, and he leans in close and breathes into his nostrils the breath of life, literally blows the Spirit of God into the man to bring him alive and make him a living soul. And why would he do that? Because we are intended to be in fellowship with God. We're created to bear his image and to be in fellowship with God. But we choose sin. And again, I so strongly encourage you not to limit the story of Adam and Eve to a history of two people a long time ago in a far off place. I'm not telling you that I don't believe there wasn't an Adam and Eve. I'll just go on record and say I tend to believe that there's truth in that story, and it's more true than not. So I tend to believe there's a first set of parents back there. I even think that somewhere out there in the scientific world, there's the idea that there is a mitochondrial Eve, a female donor that's given the mitochondrial DNA to every living human on the planet today. And if there's a single female donor for our mitochondrial DNA, maybe that's our great mother Eve, right? It's just possible. There's hints like that, even among the scientific community, that there may be more to that story. But what I want you not to do is don't just limit it to history. Don't say it's Adam and Eve's story. Understand it's my story. Mm-hmm. It was their story too, but it's my story too. Because if I had been the only one in the Garden of Eden, I would have chosen to eat the apple. That's the reality. That's the truth that's buried deep in the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and our parents' first fall, is that we all choose sin. We all actualize sin into our lives. We're born with that propensity now, and we will do it. We will actualize sin. And that will lead us in need of a loving God who is willing to come and covenant with human beings for the purpose of redemption. There is a part of me that thinks that Adam and Eve, in that first understanding of how they should live before God, I believe in Hosea, it's spoken of like it is a covenant, just implied. And then Noah, we know God makes a covenant with Noah to save a remnant of the earth, both of its people and of its animals. And then God makes a covenant with Abram, who becomes Abraham, right? And we walked through that in chapter 15, the promises in 12 and 15 and 17, but certainly that so clear in Genesis 15 with the blood path narrative and the sealing of the covenant where God pledges his blood to heal the breach in covenant if either side should fail in their covenantal responsibilities. And of course, we know God doesn't fail in his covenantal responsibilities, but the human or the Abrahamic side does. And God will eventually, one, have blood, and two, will shed blood to heal that breach, to bring those two back together into covenant relation, the new covenant in Christ's blood. The covenant with Abraham carries through to Isaac and then to Jacob, and then we go into Egypt. And in case you've never paid attention to it, and maybe many of you have, I know some of y'all have been in ministry and in the Bible a long time, but I want to run toward the end of the Genesis, the book of Genesis. And Genesis has this lovely 50th chapter in it, right? And how does the book of Genesis end, right? Well, Genesis, again, the book of Genesis gets us from creation, from nothing to creation of the world, through to the patriarchs that are the forefathers of the nation of Israel. They're not the nation of Israel, but they're the forefathers of the nation of Israel. And then through the story of Joseph, we get the descendants of Abraham. We get them into the land of Egypt, and there they are. And the end of Genesis, I'm going to pick up at 24. Okay? Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So Joseph made the Israelites swear, saying, when God comes to you, you shall carry up my bones from here. And Joseph died, being 110 years old, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. Another Dennis Kinlaw sort of preaching story. Because where we end up with Genesis, we end up in what will become the nation of Israel as a slave people in Egypt. And then we're going to get to the book of Exodus, and in the book of Exodus, you can almost think about it as the creation story of the people of Israel. You can kind of see that narrative unfold. But think about this crazy Joseph who gets embalmed and stuck in a coffin. Dennis Kinlaw posited this kind of imaginary image, which I think is a fun one. So let's have it. You know, Joseph is embalmed and stuck in a coffin in the land of Egypt, and somebody had to keep track of the joker. Right? I mean, yeah. you have the in-laws over for brunch on Sabbath, and you all are sitting on the couch and kick your feet up on the coffee table, and suddenly you realize it's kind of coffin shaped. Somebody says, what's in this box? Oh, that's, Grandpa Joseph's bones. One of these days, God is going to come and set us free. And when we go back to the land God promised to Abraham, we're going to carry Joseph's bones. We're going to carry this coffin with us and bury Joseph back in the land God promised to Abram. And which, by the way, they owned a little piece of. Mm-hmm. There's another beautiful story when Sarah dies and Abraham goes to the city gate and he's bargaining with the Canaanites to buy a piece of real estate, which he couldn't do under their laws and customs because he wasn't a Canaanite citizen. Because he was a roaming nomad, he wasn't allowed to own property. But through a series of negotiations, they make an exception to their own law, and they allow him to buy the field with a cave in it at Machpelah. And that's where he buries Sarah, his wife. And that's ultimately where he'll be buried. And where Joseph says, "Take my bones back." Now you just tell me, if you have to keep passing this bone box, this coffin, generation to generation, don't you have to keep the story of the box alive too?
Yep.
And doesn't that create just the tiniest little kernel of hope in a whole people that end up being held in slavery and captivity and oppressed for 400 years?
Yeah.
Joseph's little words here. Take me back, take my bones. When God, God will surely come and bring you up out of this land, the land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when he does, carry my bones from here. And then he died, and he was embalmed, and he was stuck in a coffin. Somebody had to keep track of old great-grandpa Joseph until the time came when they left the land of Egypt, and they carried the bones of Joseph with them back to the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's a great little way, a little window into talking about God's promises and how important it is to trust God and how important it is to have hope that God will fulfill his promises. And that's putting some feet to your hope right there. Just take my body and embalm it and stick it in a box, and when the time comes, y'all carry me away from here. And the way that the story of God's covenant with Abraham got passed from generation to generation to generation to generation until the time of Moses and the plagues and the Exodus, which of course is our next chapter. And then in the Exodus, we have the plagues and we have the demonstration of God's power and, quite frankly, his creation of a community of people who will become the nation of Israel. And those people are forged in the crucible of slavery in Egypt, and then they are freed, as you can read in the narrative, and I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with those stories. And the story of Moses, the story of the Exodus, the story of the plagues, and how God shows himself to Moses in the burning bush, how Moses hears the name of God. And that name of God then is written down in all of these scriptures, because whoever's telling this story is on the other side of Moses. Some like to say the books of Moses and attribute the first 5 books to Moses as the author. I'm not going to say he didn't write anything, but I don't think he was the final editor. But the name that God gave him ends up being used in Scripture. So we kind of know that those scriptures get written after the name of God has been given to Moses at the burning bush. Of course, Moses goes back. Moses proclaims the time of the nation of Israel to be set free has come, announces the plagues, and ultimately leads the people out of Egypt and to Mount Sinai, where the Sinaitic covenant is made, and we really begin to have what we can call the nation of Israel. A lot of times people really like to lock in on the Exodus and Egypt, but it's not really until the covenant at Sinai that you have the people of God in that covenant with God that's given on Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
And so these stories of creation and covenant and community, God creates the human community, of which Adam is the father of us all. And then, of course, the family or tribal identity that is demonstrated through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and really through the patriarchs. And then ultimately the Exodus the giving of the law on Mount Sinai, the Sinaitic covenant, and the wilderness wanderings all serve to consolidate the people to form the nation of Israel. And then they're ready to go into conquest. Book of Joshua, we have the story of the conquest and how they begin to take over the land that was promised to them. And along the way, there are some interesting kinds of notes. And one note that is pulled out in the lecture notes for chapter 3 on the Torah is the responsibility to educate, because you have to pass on the covenant and its obligations to your children and your children's children. So you have the Shema and this command that you are supposed to impress them of, the laws of God, the statutes God's given, impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands, bind them to your foreheads, write them on your door frames of your houses and on your gates. This whole idea that the community, the people of God, Israel in this case, have a responsibility to educate, subsequent generations in the law and in the covenant, so that they can continue to keep the covenant of God. And then if you bring that forward into the new covenant and you think about the church, the body of Christ, some will refer to the church as the new Israel. And we too, we have a responsibility. We sort of inherit that responsibility to, one, be a people, two, be a people of God, and also to educate ourselves and our children and our future generations about the laws and statutes of God. Okay?
All right.
Now that's a lot. We've run kazoom, really through the rest of Genesis and Exodus and Joshua. We haven't gone through Leviticus, and we won't go through Leviticus and Deuteronomy, but you can go read them, and the law of God, the Sinaitic covenant, spelled out in amazing detail. Hopefully you're writing your summaries of the books of the Bible, and maybe you'll be intrigued. I've often made the comment that God's cure for insomnia was the book of Leviticus. If you don't believe me, just the next time you can't go to sleep at night, lay in your bed with the light dim and start reading Leviticus. And my guess is you will wake up in the morning with the Bible laying on your chest or slid off on the floor, but you're going to go to sleep somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
But the other thing is there are amazing principles buried, and that you don't have to dig too hard to find them, but there are amazing principles that are woven into the Levitical law. And so the book of Leviticus ends up being very much worth your read and your study. There are all of these laws concerning offerings, and you got all of the, the priestly laws, all of the, what will become the core of the temple cultus for offering sacrifice, and all the different, in somewhat excruciating details about what to do with the kidneys and entrails and loins, the appendage of the liver, and it's amazing how much detail is in some of this. And then the sin offerings that are made and how they should be, the blood should be sprinkled. And so you have this, again, this whole idea, blood is required for the forgiveness of sin. And this whole idea that the blood of the sacrifices but it's not healing the breach in the covenant. And it wouldn't, because that's not the blood that was pledged to heal the breach in the covenant. Anyway, you roll through the book of Leviticus and sort of eventually I'm probably not going to just throw my finger on it, but there's provision for the sin offering. And of course, it's the lamb. You should bring a lamb. But if you can't afford a lamb, then there's a provision that you can bring a pair of turtle doves. And if you can't afford a pair of turtle doves, there's a provision that you can bring an ephah of fine flour. And that ends up being very important, I think, to me, because what it means is that the Levitical law meant to put forgiveness in the hands of everyone. It's not meant to be a hierarchical class system where only the rich can afford the offering to get their sins forgiven, but provision is made that it's going to cost you something, but it's going to cost you something you can afford, based on where you are socioeconomically. If you roll on through, we get around Leviticus 19, 20, 21, and there are all of the laws related to living with other people. And there are the laws of cleanliness and all, but there's sexual conduct. There's a code of sexual conduct. And I'm going to Leviticus, 18, depending upon what version you read it in, you will have this amazing, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, begotten by your father, which I think would have gotten Abraham and Sarai in trouble, by the way. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. You shall not uncover they go through all kinds of incestual relationships that are banned. There are, you shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It's an abomination. I believe that's 1822. Just in case anybody wants to know if the Bible says anything about that. You shall not have sexual relations with any animal and defile yourself with it. So bestiality is right out. Long and skinny as God ends up being in the Levitical laws, the principle is made clear that God cares about human sex. And why is that the case? Looks like I'm frozen again. There's a part of me that always wants to ask the question, why do you think God cares about what human beings do with sex? And I end up saying, well, could it be because we have the image of God, we bear the image of God, and we reproduce the image of God through sex? And so that God ends up being concerned about his image and what's happening to it. And by the way, in case you've never read it, the poor animals have to die. They get used sexually. And the people that do that with animals are supposed to die. Why is that a killing offense? And why is the victim, the animal, put to death? Well, again, it speaks to how important that area of our life is to God and the importance that he has attached to it. You get all the laws about idols. You get laws about planting fields and harvest and gleaning, the laws of gleaning. You won't harvest the outer rows and corners of your fields, but you will leave those for the poor. Okay. God makes provision in his law that a society, a people, should be mindful to take care of other people in the society. And there seems to be the acknowledgement that there's always going to be, it's what Jesus says, the poor will always be with you. Well, woven into the principles that stand behind the Levitical law seem to be the idea that there's always going to be poor people who need to eat, and you should make provision. You who have land and wealth and grow crops, part of your responsibility for being in that position is when you harvest, you leave the outer rows of your field and your corners so that the poor can come along, and they're going to do work. They're going to have to harvest their own food, but it's going to be there for them to harvest. So those who don't own fields and lands and can't grow crops of their own will still be able to have some food because you leave the outer two rows and the corners of your fields. What I would hope is a bunch of these laws might begin to sound like principles that Jesus taught. Remember, Jesus said, I did not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fill them full. Instead of them just being this rote list of things that you could check off, they become principles. They become principles of love. That we love our neighbor, we love God, and we love our neighbor even as ourselves. And so we have a responsibility. Go back to Genesis chapter 4 and ask the question, am I my brother's keeper? To which the answer should be, yes, I am my brother's keeper. That just gets expounded in detail, and that principle gets fleshed out in all of the Levitical laws. Okay, I'm about through with my speech there, so I'm ready for thoughts or questions from you. Everybody's jumping in to ask a bunch of questions.
Well, it appears very repetitive from Genesis.
Well, and why, what's interesting is Cain, what is it? If it wasn't for the New Testament, we would never hear about Cain and Abel again. We hear about them in chapter 4, and we don't ever hear about them again in the Old Testament. But, and it's almost the same for the story of creation. We don't really hear about Adam and Eve. There's a little bit in Hosea maybe, but all of those, especially those first 3 and then 4 chapters, are so foundational, theological to the rest of what happens in the Old Testament. It's almost just like it's the foundation, and when you put the house on top of the foundation, you never see it again. But it's still there holding it up. Part of the reason why I want to spend as much time as we have in those early chapters in Genesis, teasing them apart and pulling up the theology that's embedded in there. Which I find
he talks about not eating the blood of animals.
Right.
Because it's their blood. I mean, that comes all the way from the beginning.
That's right.
He never changes. He's the same.
And
he never changes.
That's exactly right. The other thing is what I think is one of the strongest arguments going against homosexuality is the argument from creation. That woven into the created order is a creation ethic. And those ethics have to do with the way God intended human beings to live. And he created them male and female, that they would live together as husband and wife. That's an ethic that's woven into the fabric of creation.
Yeah, I mean, God talked to all this information that's in Leviticus and in 18, 19, 20, 21, all these laws. These are just more specifics about what he said in the beginning.
That's right.
And it's amazing the number of years that pass and nothing changes. God
Right.
never.
Well, and what's, if nothing else is startling, if not amazing, is why are people still struggling with the same things 3,000 years later?
Because we're sin.
Because sin is still at work in our world.
Absolutely.
But praise be to God, we know that he has made a provision to deal with our sin and to bring us back into right relationship, to move us back toward that shalom peace of the garden and the fourfold right relationships.
You know, you said it about an hour ago. You said Adam and Eve. This is my story too.
That's right.
Sin is attractive. And the dark side makes sure that it makes it that way.
Yes, but once you taste and see the goodness of God, do you ever want to go back?
No, I
Nope.
don't.
No.
No. Been there. It's hell. Living that kind of life is hell. And people look at it and think that it's attractive until they really get a good picture of what they're doing and how much that they're negatively impacting everything in their life. And then once you see that, you know, and it's only through God that those eyes are opened up.
So at this point in the course, we've kind of worked our way through the Torah and especially carefully through the first few chapters of Genesis. And what I hope is that you've begun to get a feel for what we would call biblical theology, which isn't theology like systematic theology that sort of tries to follow a logical order and borrow a lot from philosophy, but it really lifts its themes right out of the text of Scripture. So one of the themes of biblical theology is God as the creator, the goodness of creation, right? The power of God's word, the presence of God's spirit, the covenant people of God, all of those kinds of things. And, you know, different people who do biblical theology will sort of collect their theological formulations around different ways of stating themes, but that's those themes of creation and covenant and community are going to repeat themselves over and over and over in the Old Testament. And what's going to happen is we're going to come to the prophets and then the writings, and I think what we're going to find is that we're going to hear these themes of creation and covenant and community and how God made us to be in covenant with him and to live together in community for the purpose that he created us. It's kind of a beautiful circle among the creation, the covenant, and the community. All right. If all minds and hearts are clear,
Yeah.
I'm going to be done for the night. So, everybody okay with that?
Are you available for questions later?
I'll take questions now if you have them, or you can email me questions most any time.
All right. No, I'm just trying to still soaking it in here.
There's a lot to digest with this.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's a lot to digest.
Yes, there is. If nothing else, let's just say I hope that you picked up a lot, but if nothing else, I hope some of you decide that you can preach from the book of Genesis and actually find good stuff in there to preach about.
I'm actually preaching this Sunday about my brother's keeper.
There you go. That's great stuff. Which, if you really think about it, is repeated in Jesus' statement of the Great Commandments when he says, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself, which is, I am my brother's keeper.
Yep.
He answers the question, who is my neighbor, with the story of the Good Samaritan. He just reiterates, I am my brother's keeper. And who's my brother? Everybody else on the planet's my brother.
Yep.
Who's my neighbor? Everybody else is my neighbor.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's some part of me that in those kinds of terms really sees very, very clear correlation between the picture of God in the Old Testament and the picture of God we have in the New Testament through Jesus. Those aren't dissimilar pictures. They end up being the same picture. A fuller revelation of an earlier revelation.
Jesus never changed.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody's mostly quiet, so appreciate you tuning in and your hard work, and I look forward to seeing your papers next week. So if there was any question about the due date and time, it's 11:59:59:59 on the 20th.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
All right.
Thank you.
Ending water, brother.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.
Bye.